I'm Heather. This is
Therese.
We're out in Minnesota, and today we're going to be talking about living Advent with Mary. And in particular, going off of three main qualities that she lived: poverty, generosity, and simplicity. So how can we prepare for Christmas with Mary? How can we imitate her in welcoming Christ in our lives this Advent season? And true to the two people that wrote this teaching, I being a mom, my examples will be mostly external things, because that's what I was reflecting on when I was thinking of simplicity of life. It was all the external simplicity. Whereas Therese, being consecrated, it's more of the interior. So you definitely get the Martha and the Mary right here with us. So first we're going to talk about simplicity. Now, as I prepare for Christmas, I find that my Advent season is filled with thoughts of what presents do I need to buy, what grandparents is buying what are we buying, what desserts do I need to make to celebrate all of these Advent saints, which parties are we going to go to, when are the parties, what about writing this talk, there's so many things. And it is anything but this quiet season of waiting. It's not. My mind is so chaotic and filled and just running from here to there, thinking about all these things. So one day in prayer, I just sort of put myself with the Holy Family, and I thought, what was the Holy Family's life like? Mary and Joseph only, as they prepared for Jesus to actually come out into the world. And then what was it even like when Jesus was with them? And what I came up with, and I imagine, is that Mary and Joseph's life was very simple in the day-to-day reality. Now granted, they had very dramatic moments when they were fleeing to Egypt and traveling to Bethlehem with a super pregnant woman. And okay, so not talking about those moments, which weren't simple, but when they were just settled in Nazareth, when they were settled in Egypt, what did their life consist of? And I imagine it was filled with basic things: food preparation, keeping the house tidy, Joseph doing his carpentry work, visiting with neighbors, friends, family, their daily prayer, making their annual pilgrimages related to their faith. These were basic day-to-day things. And sure, like if there was a traveling theater troupe that came into town, I'm sure they went. It was part of their community, they went. But they weren't hitching up their donkey to go and travel to all the neighboring towns to entertain themselves and fill up their schedule. And because Mary and Joseph lived very simple, uncrowded lives, I think this is key, uncrowded, they were able to hear the angels speak and to recognize it as the voice of God. Their mind wasn't so full of everything else. They actually had reserves in their emotional tank, in their physical tank. When Joseph needs to get Mary up and Jesus and walk to Egypt, he has reserves in his body, even physically, to do that because he hasn't maxed himself out. They were able to say yes because they weren't maxed out. And so I find for myself that this has been true also. It's one of the appeals of backpacking to me. There's not much to do. You're carrying everything on your back. You already know what you're going to eat. You just know what you got to get to today. But a specific example I can give is when I walked the Camino in Spain one summer. And all I was concerned with were the daily tasks. How far are we traveling? Which hostel were we going to stay in? What food were we going to eat? Where are we going to get to Mass? It was very basic. I mean, we weren't really thinking about yesterday. We weren't thinking about tomorrow. My friend and I, we were just in today. And that really gave us a lot of freedom to interact with the other pilgrims, to be really present and treasure the moment. And that was great. So I ask you, how is your life rhythm right now in Advent? Is our life rhythm so crowded with events and rushing from here to there, squeezing in prayer while I'm driving, being too busy to really connect with the people around us? How is our mind right now? Is it so crowded with all the things that we still have to do and we still have to buy, and holiday travel plans, and oh gosh, I really hope my boyfriend proposes to me during the holidays. I mean, are we thinking about all of that, or are we just right here today? Lord, how are you going to find me today?
Question for us is, interiorly, do I accept to be simple? Where and how can we simplify our lives so that we can hear the Christ more in our hearts and make space for him? Maybe this Advent season we need to take time with the Lord and ask, Lord, what's essential in my life? What is not essential? What can I let go of so that you have more room to speak in my life? And each of that will depend for each of us what our state of life is, what's essential, what's important. Of course, if you have kids, you need to take care of kids. If you're a priest, you make sure you need to pray your liturgy of the hours and consecrate it. Single, each person has a different state of life that they're required and they need to do to fulfill their vocation. But outside of those, what else? What's in my life? What clutters my life? What can I let go of? And I can just give a little example from my own life. When I was at the House of Formation, I realized that I was spending a lot of time worrying about what I was going to make for dinner at the house for the sisters. It just really felt like I really need to make a wonderful meal for these sisters. I love them. I want to make a good meal for them. And there was nothing wrong with that. But when I'd go and pray in adoration, my mind would be just occupied with, what recipe am I going to make? And oh my goodness, well, do we have this in the kitchen? And how am I going to get that? What am I going to do? And I realized this is out of balance. Like, this is not what the Lord wants for me. Like, I'm too worried about this. And I had to go with that in prayer, and the Lord being like, just be simple. Right now you can't do top-notch meals. It's okay. If you put on the table spaghetti, it's not the end of the world. It's going to be okay. And I had to just take a step back and say, okay, Lord, I would love to make a great meal. I'm just not in that place right now, and it's taking me away from you. And so I'm going to let that go. And it was humbling. I think sometimes this call to simplicity in our lives, it puts us in touch with our limits. And it makes us aware of what we can't do, what we wish we could do. And to just accept that from the Lord and say, okay, Lord, I know you're going to make up for where I lack. And I can trust you with that. And that leads into the second point of our talk, which is poverty. When Jesus came to Nazareth, when he became man, he was poor. He was born in a stable in poverty. He lived his life and did his ministry in poverty. He lived and he died on the cross with nothing. And the same for Mary. She was just a poor woman in Nazareth. She didn't have any riches. She didn't have any political influence in her life. She lived in an oppressed country that was oppressed by political power. And yet she prayed and trusted that the Lord would act and he'd be faithful to his promises to send the Messiah, that he was with them. And it's just a question for us. Do we expect that God wants to come to us where we are poor? Do we welcome him in that place? How do we let the Lord help us grow in poverty of spirit so that he becomes our one treasure and we open our hearts more to him? Mary welcomed Jesus in her poverty. She didn't tell the angel Gabriel, I'm sorry, I don't have any political power, I don't have any riches. Being the mother of the Messiah, that's kind of a big deal, come back later, I'll make some preparations and then I'll say yes, okay? She didn't do that. She said fiat. She welcomed the Lord in her poverty where she was because she knew God could provide. It wasn't a problem for him. She welcomed his plan in that and accepted her limitations and her constraints. And I just have a practical little story from that for me when accepting our constraints and our poverty and how the Lord can come in that. Another story was at the House of Formation. We would sometimes welcome homeless people to come and eat with us. And this was at the beginning of the House of Formation. It was still really pretty rusty in French, not very good, made a lot of mistakes. And we welcomed one day this friend of Anne-Laure, this woman who she'd been on the streets for years. She had agoraphobia, which is where a person has intense anxiety about going outside of their house. And social interactions are really, really painful and difficult, really anxiety provoking for these people. And so she suffered with that. And we welcomed her into the home, and Anne-Laure told us, well, just be very gentle when you approach her, give her space, welcome her. So we did. We welcomed her. We sat down to eat, and I wasn't quite sure how much she was going to speak because I knew she was probably feeling kind of anxious. And so I tried saying something to her in French and tried to have a conversation, and she corrected my French. and I was absolutely delighted, which was just a complete surprise because at this point I was still really frustrated with my French. But in that moment I realized that because I couldn't speak French, that was one way to welcome her and to show Christ's love to her, and the fact that she could correct my French, and that my poverty in that moment with the language was actually a gift to her. And in accepting that, the Lord could work.
Yeah, and there's also a spiritual value to material poverty. And I'm not talking about total destitution where you're wondering where your rent's going to come from and living under a bridge, although I'm sure the Lord is present there also. But I'm just talking about the enough material poverty where we have to make choices. We have limited resources. We can't do everything we want to do. We can't buy everything we want to buy. And there's a value in that. Because when we are poor, we don't get to do everything we want to do and buy all that we want to buy. I just said that, but it's in the notes, so there you go. Because we can't afford to go on every trip that maybe comes up, every vacation, every program that your child wants to go to for that school is offering. If we don't have the material resources to do all of that, then we have to be discerning what actually are we called to do. What is the best choice for my family? What's the best choice for me as a single person right now as far as my time goes, because money is going towards whatever that program is. And so because we can't take it all, we actually then have to choose what is really going to give us or our family life. And so there's a value there. It's also part of that simplicity. We can't fill up our schedule with lots of programs if we can't afford all the programs. And when it comes to material goods, we have to choose what is really needed. And we have to eliminate the passing whim or desire. So I can give you an example here. My family, we just got chickens, so I'm spending a lot of time in the tractor supply store and whatever, feed stores. And so once I was there and I saw these cowboy boots. Oh, they look so pretty. Oh, and they're Ariats, they $125. And I'm thinking, well, my birthday's coming up and Christmas is only a month after, so maybe I could get these cowboy boots and it could be like a double present from my husband. And I had to sort of check myself and say, Heather, you have never owned cowboy boots. You don't even know if you would wear them regularly enough to justify having your husband spend $125 on these boots. And so I said, okay. My no doesn't have to be no forever, but what I'm going to do this year, when the summer rolls around and I'm wearing skirts and dresses, and I can say, if I had those boots, would I wear them right now? And if I find that in the course of a year I would wear them a handful of times, okay, I don't need them. But if I find I would wear them 20, 25 times, then okay, I can ask for them for a double gift. But it's about sort of not just going after all those whims, those desires. And if we struggle financially even to meet the basic needs, there's even a value in that, because it's an opening for God to reveal his providence, the way that he cares for us. And this was definitely the case for Mary and Joseph. I mean, think about it. She's fully pregnant, it's winter, and they can't find lodging. So what do they have to say? Lord, help us. Like, we need you to come up with a solution here. Herod wants to kill the child, and they know they can't fight against the soldiers. Okay, Lord, you need to show us the right road, and you need to show us the right time. We depend on you for our very life, the life of our child. Then they flee to Egypt, and they have to start over from scratch. Okay, God, we depend on you to take care of us. So they were in real material poverty, and they had to depend on the Lord, and of course the Lord came through. And it's the same with us. So whether our financial means cause us to live in poverty or not, how can we cultivate a spirit of poverty in our lives this Advent? When we look at all of the holiday sales that come up, Black Friday and Cyber Monday, which is really now Cyber Week, and we can ask ourselves, will the goods I already have suffice? Another boot chicken example. So again, birthday, Christmas, very close together. My mom wants to buy me something. Oh, well, I need boots to get out to the chicken coop, and my snow boots are getting a little torn, and now let me spend millions of hours looking at all these different snow boots, and that can work with the chickens, and since we already gave this teaching to the local community, so I've in a way been talking to myself on this theme of poverty and saying, gosh, like, will the boots I already have work, and just buy a very cheap pair of something to get out to the coop? And I think it might, it seems like it's doing fine. So similarly, like when parents want gift ideas for us, rather than like come up with a bunch of stuff just so they can buy us something, but it's not really something we really want, but why don't we ask them to donate to a charity in our honor? Or say, okay, why don't you give me money so I can buy homeless supplies and I can make homeless kits. I did this probably last year. And so we've got these gallon bags full of supplies, and it's actually benefiting my family, because now whenever we go into the cities, like we bring it, and my teenage boys are getting out of the car and they're going and talking to a panhandler. Like they're encountering that person as a person, not just a beggar. And you know what? Getting that money for the supplies for the homeless meant it was one less item for me in the house. And for those of you that have families and large families, I'm sure you totally understand where I'm coming from, right? Even sort of poverty and the amount of things that come into our house means a simple life, or more simple life for us, because it's less stuff to just make us annoyed in our being. Last one on this topic, which actually connects next one will be generosity, but can we increase the amount that we donate all year so that we actually do live a little bit more in that limited resource poverty? Whereas like when the opportunity to go on a cruise with our girlfriends comes up, we actually can say, I don't have the money because I donated. I mean, obviously you wouldn't want to say that because I'd be showing off, but that would be a beautiful reality in what we're called to do, which leads into generosity.
So this generosity. So Mary was able to live generously. She was able to live generously because she recognized that God had given everything that she had, and that he would provide everything she needed, and he was worthy of her trust. And when we live this way, we're able to give generously. We live in this spirit of praise, just like Mary did, because we know He's good, God's with us, and He's going to take care of us. We've been given, God has given to us freely. And Matthew 10:8 says, without cost you have received, without cost you are to give. Just question, how can we live in this spirit of thanksgiving and generosity for all that the Lord has given us?
Right, and just a couple areas as proof of Mary's generosity. So one, she was really generous towards God's will for her. When she didn't put restrictions when the angel came to her, she didn't say, yes, okay, as long as Joseph can know what's happening, as long as you can guarantee I'm not going to get stoned for being pregnant out of wedlock. Right? She just said, yes, whatever you want, Lord. So she was very generous with God's will. And I can think of an example from my own life. When I was single and I was always wrestling with my vocation, and all of a sudden there was the point in the Mass when we lift our hearts up to the Lord, and I had a hard time saying that prayer, like meaning it for probably a couple month window of time, because it was like, well, Lord, if I lift my heart up to you and give you my heart, what if you keep it? What if you keep it? You don't let me get married, And so I had to really wrestle with that in prayer, and finally, to be able to say, okay, Lord, I lift my heart up to you, whatever you want to do with it. He definitely took me on a loop-de-loop roller coaster after that. That's the Lord's way. Mary was also generous towards Elizabeth and Zechariah. So she traveled, when she went from Nazareth to the hill country of Judea, she traveled between 80 and 90 miles. Okay, so by herself, that's a risky journey. On her way back, she would have been about 3 months pregnant. So it's a risky time for a woman to make that travel. But Mary wasn't looking at herself. She wasn't, again, like that when I was talking about simplicity, she wasn't all like wrapped up in her own thoughts and her own life. Like, she said, my cousin Elizabeth needs help. She's pregnant and she's elderly. Like, I'm going to go. So are we generous with the people around us? Are we looking internal, or are we looking out, and are we seeing needs and responding generously to the needs of others? And last area where she was generous, Mary was generous to the preborn Jesus by giving him her very flesh. Now, maybe since Mary was without sin, she did not have the sufferings that come with being pregnant. I don't know, maybe. But growing a baby really costs a woman something. And there's the rare woman who just glows her whole pregnancy and loves being pregnant. And I felt like I had good pregnancies, but man, there was discomfort and pain, and just ask any mom, it takes something to grow a baby. And so Mary was very generous in just giving of her own flesh to Jesus. Now, I know Mary didn't have a C-section, but recently some women were sharing with me who have had C-sections, sort of the Christ-like imagery of that very process of giving birth that way, where a woman's arms are strapped out to her side. The cut comes from her side, obviously a lot lower than Jesus is being pierced, but the cut comes and the blood is spilled from her side, and the baby is brought forth. And so we can see even in that image of bearing life, like the Christ-like imagery of Christ on the cross, bearing life in us. Right. So how does that apply to us in being generous? I guess, are we willing to help our neighbor move their house and be exhausted in our body? Are we willing to stay up late with someone who needs us and again be exhausted? I don't know, I can't think of other examples, but are we willing to sort of give of our flesh for other people?
So this generosity is something that the Lord helps us live. And it's based on what he's already given us. He's already given us life. He's already given his life to save us. So you can't outdo the generosity of God. So don't be scared. And the Lord will help you discern how to give. So no fear with that. And he'll make it clear. But it's just to live in this spirit of thanksgiving and praise and generosity, because he's given us everything. And he's really with us. So this Advent, just in conclusion, let's ask the Lord how to live in greater simplicity, generosity, and poverty. Let's ask him to show us how to simplify our lives and how to become more generous with him and to those around us, to show his love. And just really make present, really welcome more and more Emmanuel, God with us this Christmas, in our hearts and in our lives.
Great. Now, if you're in a communal setting and you want to have small groups, here are a couple questions for you to consider. One, is there an example from your life or the life of someone you know or you look up to that sort of elaborates or illustrates the benefit of simplicity, poverty, or generosity? And then, remember the other one?
How is the Lord helping you or encouraging you to grow in poverty and simplicity or generosity in your life right now? What maybe are some little steps you can take in order to make more room for the Lord, to hear his voice in your life and be poorer and simpler with him?
Great. Thank you very much.